Okay, in our today's session, we'll be talking about CSS. So we have covered some concepts on some fundamentals on HTML5, and then we are taking the next step in learning CSS. So we'll be taking a look at some of the basics of the cascading style sheets, which can help us style the web pages that we are building. Okay, so in your assignment, you might have seen that you built a website. Couple of case studies where you haven't even applied any styles at all, so they look pretty bland. Okay, your CSS basically helps you to to control your fonts, colors, appearance of your websites. Okay, that's what CSS is. So the full form of CSS is Cascading Style Sheets Language. Okay, so we have three versions of CSS: CSS1, CSS2, and CSS3. So CSS1 is pretty old. So in version 1 of CSS, they have introduced fonts, colors, alignment, and spacing. And after that, we have CSS 2.1, which basically in addition to whatever we have in CSS1, they have introduced the layouts and positioning as well. Positioning layouts and positioning of your elements. And CSS3 is one of the the recent one. The recent most one is CSS3. It actually have added a lot of effects, graphics, and whatnot. They have like a lot of things that are available in CSS, where we can develop web applications that can be used across even multiple devices. Okay, we have CSS3 media queries and all of those stuff. Okay, so when we are developing your cascading style sheet rules, your CSS rules may not work in all the browsers. So if you wanted to see picking up a rule, you just have to make sure that okay, whatever the browsers that you are targeting, you need to make sure that that rule works in those browsers. Okay, you can take a look at that quixmode.org website to see if a CSS rule works for a specific browser. Okay, and there is another website there as well, which provides a list of CSS rules that we can use to style our pages. Okay, if you want to see all of them, okay, what are all the available CSS rules that are available, because there are like many of them, so you can visit that website to see it. Okay, the same way we have seen our HTML validator site, so we also have a similar CSS validator site that we can actually use. Okay, you can upload your style sheet or you can copy paste your styles in there. It will validate it for you. Okay, so when you're basically developing your CSS, you basically write all your styles. I have showed you last time that you can embed your styles in a separate style sheet and include that in your HTML document. So the advantage that you get with that is basically you can have multiple pages, can use the same style sheet. Okay, that's a primary advantage that you get when you encapsulate your styles into a separate file. Okay, or you can also define your styles inside your head tag, inside your style tag basically. Okay, you can also define it there, and also you can define inline styles. So all your HTML elements basically have the style property that you can use to define your inline styles. Okay, so there is a precedence on which one will override the other, which we'll talk about it in a little while. But these are the places where you can put your style sheets or embed your styles. Okay, and in order to let's go back and let's take a look at a basic CSS to see how it actually is applied. Let me show you an example, and from there we can talk about it. Okay, this is a small HTML fragment which contains bunch of HTML tags here. So here, this is the one that I was talking about. You have your body, background color equal to some Bollywood. We'll talk about what this is. And then this is your body tag, and you have a paragraph in here. And you also have a link relationship to style sheet. It's pointing to a styles file, which is defined inside your styles.css. You go to your styles.css, basically have a body which is set to a background color, Bollywood, and paragraph which has some style, font size is larger. Okay, so when you define a style rule, so this is what is called as a style rule. This is your style rule. Okay, so this is here is called your CSS selector. Okay, the name here is your CSS selector. Okay, this is your rule variable name and this is your rule value. Okay, this is basically is your style rule. Okay, so here I'm setting my body background color as Bollywood. Bollywood is, if you see, that is a color there, you can hover on it, you can see that color. Okay, so this color would be applied to this body element inside my HTML. Okay, so let's load this on your browser to see your styles. Okay, so that's your HTML with a background color of Bollywood. Okay, so if you want to define, you can define your style here, or you can define your styles inside your styles.css. So the best practice that we do in our programming, we basically encapsulate it in a different style sheet by creating a .css file. Okay, here I have paragraph, font size is larger, so that's why the font appears a little bigger on your website. So you understood the basic rule. The way we do it is, we define your selector and you open, if you see, have a curly brace opening and curly brace closing. So each and every rule ends with a semicolon, and you have your colon separator between your variable name and your value. Okay, you can define multiple rules within a block. Okay, so that's how you define your style rules. Alrighty, moving on. So if you see, I have chosen the background color property to Bollywood. So there are like multiple ways to pick colors for your color property or your background color property. You can specify that in plain English. You can specify it as a red, green, blue, and what colors that we have. Or you can also apply them in hexadecimal values. Or you can also apply them in a function format in the form of RGB. For example, think of like any color that you're seeing. It's a combination of some percentage of red, some percentage of green, and some percentage of blue. These three are your main colors. Rest of all the colors are derived from these three colors. Okay, so that's very important thing to understand. So if you wanted to choose here, there are multiple color pickers that are available online to see if you wanted to choose a particular color, like what code that you wanted to apply, what hexadecimal code that you wanted to pick. You can pick it from your color pickers available online. Okay, here is your colors. Okay, either you do your hexadecimal, or you can directly specify it as red, or you can choose your hexadecimal value. Okay, here 2 letters indicates one color basically. Okay, if you see, it's 6 basically, 2, 2 and 2. So RGB is hash FF is your R, G is your 00, B is your 00. Okay, if you want, you can also specify that in the form of a function. Okay, or you can also use HSL. HSL is hue, saturation, and lightness. You can also pick those to pick up your color that you want. Okay, when you click on a particular color here, it would give you a new value. If that is a color that you want, you take the corresponding hexadecimal code and put on your website. Okay, so that's how you pick up your background colors. Okay, now let's talk about selectors. So we have already seen a selector to target the HTML element directly. So that type of selector is called simple selector. In a simple selector, you take the name of the HTML element like paragraph, body, h1, h2, anchor, div, all of these tags, the name of those tags. You use them to apply the styles for those elements. Here, if you see, I have chosen a paragraph. So all the paragraphs in my page will have the style rules applied. Okay, this type of selector is called simple selector. Okay, where you choose the name of the HTML element itself. Okay, to define the style rules. Okay, the next one is your ID selector. Your ID selector basically takes, as I told you earlier, each and every HTML element, you can use an ID attribute. and the ID values are unique. Okay, so if you wanted to target only one particular HTML element, you can define an ID for it, and then you can use your hash. A hash notation here tells your CSS that okay, look for an element with so and so ID inside the HTML markup. Okay, that's what is your HTML element ID hash. Okay, we can also use the dot. This is your class selector, where you can use your class attribute of your HTML element. Okay, if you want to target multiple elements, and if you don't want to use simple selector, because your simple selector selects only the same type of element. But if you wanted to apply a style for a paragraph and a div, okay, you can use a class selector for it. You can define a class with so and so name, like dot something like dot color, and inside that you can define your style roots, and you can take this class name and then apply that to your HTML. Okay, let's take a look at an example of these three selectors that we have here. That's your selectors. Okay, I have a HTML file here. Here if you see, I have a class equal to quotation, a paragraph class equal to quotation. If you say I wanted to apply a style that's common for my div and a paragraph here, I can define that with a class. I can use dot, the name of the class name, to define the styles inside my styles file. Okay, for example, if I wanted to target this particular paragraph, I have defined in the ID here, ID equal to content, and I can use hash content to define the style for it. Let's take a look at your styles.css here. Here if you see, I have hash content. That's the ID attribute I have defined inside my HTML file. ID equal to content. Okay, and then you have your dot quotation, that's your name of your class. Basically take a look at your class attribute here that has a value of quotation. So all the elements which has this class quotation will have those style rules applied. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the styles that are being applied. So we have class quotation. Let's take a look at what your class is doing there. It's setting your background color to red, whereas your hash content is setting your background color to gray. So let's take a look at that page in browser to see that styles being applied. Okay, let's take a look at let's keep our HTML as well side by side so we can see what's going on. If you see, we have H1 and H2. Okay, H1 and H2 is appearing in some Bollywood color. Let's take a look at your styles.css to see how it is being applied. Here if you see, I have H1 comma H2. Okay, I want two elements to have the same style. I'm setting that background color is Bollywood. Okay, if you see what is H1 and H2 here, so they are simple selector because you're targeting your elements using the name of the element itself. Okay, now let's go back. Let's take a look at the next one, a div. It's appearing in red. Okay, we have a class quotation here. So let's go back to your stylesheet.css and see what style that I have defined for quotation. Quotation background color is red. Okay, let's take a look at a paragraph. Okay, that has an ID set to content. I'll have hash content set to gray. Okay, you see that's what I'm seeing here. Okay, now let's go back and take a look at your next one. Paragraph class equal to quotation, that we have already seen the background color is set to red. Okay, so these are the commonly used selectors. You use your simple selector class selector and ID selector. These three are the very commonly used ones. Okay, so we also have a descendant selector. Your descendant selector is, so let's say I have a div. Inside that, let's say I have a form. Inside that I have a paragraph. Okay, I wanted to reach out to this paragraph. I can say div space p. So what does that mean is, so div is a parent. Somewhere as a child I have a paragraph that I wanted to apply the style. Okay, you basically define it using your descendant selector. You say div p. Okay, if you see, your paragraph is not an immediate child, right? Your paragraph is a direct child of form. Your form is a direct child of your div. Okay, your div is kind of like the root of your tree. Okay, but if you wanted to reach out to your paragraph, you can say div p. So all the divs which contains a paragraph will have the style rules applied. So that's what is your descendant selector. Okay, but if you wanted to have a direct child relationship, you can also do that. You can use your direct child selector. For example, if I have a div, inside that I have a paragraph. I want to target all the divs which has an immediate child of paragraph. I define my styles like this. I say div. You see, you have a greater than symbol here, p. So when you see greater than symbol, that means it's an immediate child or a direct child. Okay, you have your descendant selector and your direct child selector. Okay, so we can also use attribute selector. Your attribute selector is a way to select elements which has an attribute. For example, here I am selecting an image element which has my alt attribute set to a value called spacer. Okay, if I have, let's say I have 10 images on my page. Out of those 10 images, I have 4 or 5 images which contains the alt value set to spacer. I can do that by using image, select all the images which contains the alternate attribute set to your value spacer. Okay, and I wanted to apply the style called padding of 10 pixel. We'll talk about what padding is. For now, the important thing is you need to understand the attribute selector. Okay, for example, if you have multiple links on your page, you can say anchor. You open your bracket, square brackets, and you can say href equal to something, some value. It will select all the anchors which has that href matching value. Okay, this attribute selector can select multiple elements because there could be multiple images with the alternate text set to a spacer. Okay, you have your start selector. Your start selector is your wildcard selector. So this is where all the elements will get the same style. Whatever you define here, all the elements will have that style. But we rarely use it, but it's there. Okay, we also have pseudo classes. Pseudo classes is an important part of your applying styles. So what will happen is your browser, what it does is based upon a certain action that you perform on a HTML element, it will add a property to it, or it will change a property on that particular element. For example, if you, let's say in our website that we are viewing, we have Google here, right? If you see, this is actually a link. So when I click on that link, what browser does is it's going to add a property to this particular link called visited. Okay. Using that visited property, you can actually say I wanted to, whenever I have a particular anchor which has a visited, I wanted to change that color to so and so. We can do that. Okay, let's go back there. So these are the classes that are added by the browser automatically. Okay, for example, when I click on that link, I want my color to change to red. I can say anchor :visited color red. We have various pseudo classes. For example, when you want to put the mouse on it and you wanted to change the color of your link, you can also do that. You can say anchor :hover color equal to green, for example. So when you put your mouse on it, it will automatically change to green. Here, this is where you basically, visited is basically you say your link has been clicked. So whenever the link is clicked, I want the color to change to red. Let me see if I think I have an example for it. Let's take a look. So here I have a Google link. Let's go to your style sheets. Here it is. Anchor visited, color is red. Anchor hover, text decoration is underline. It's basically telling like, okay, when I put my mouse on that link, I wanted to see an underline for it. Okay, when I click on that link, I want the color of the text to change to red. If you go back here, you can take a look. If you put your mouse, you can see that there is an underline there, correct? Okay, when you click on it, it actually goes to Google. It doesn't I don't have that target attribute set, so that's why it's behaving a little weird. Let's go back and open the live preview one more time. Let's define the target attribute for our link. Target equal to underscore blank. Okay, you can see that it actually changed. It's alright, the link was changed to red when I clicked on it. So that's your pseudo classes. These are called pseudo classes. So browser adds certain properties to your links, to your elements, which you can use to style those elements as well. Okay, so we have various other CSS selectors available. So I actually have them inside a file. Let me open that. I created a comprehensive list of all the selectors that I'm aware of, so which you can take a look. Here you can also say like, okay, so if you have a UL which contains a bunch of LIs, you wanted to target only the first LI, you can also do that. You can say UL LI first child, or you wanted to target the last child, you can also do that. You can use your nth child selector to select the number of child that you want. If I have multiple LI elements, I wanted to select the third element to apply the styles. So likewise, we have like bunch of CSS selectors that are available, which you can take a look. For example, some of these are your attribute selectors. For example, here you have your cap equal to, select all the images which has the alt value starting with hello. Your cap means it's starting with. Okay, here you have your alt star equal to word. Select all the images which has an alt attribute value contains world. Okay, if your alternate attribute value contains world, it will select all those images. Here this is starts with. Here this is ends with. Dollar equal to means ends with. Select all the anchors that has a href value ends with .jpg or JPEG or whatever that you wanted to have. And we have already seen some of these. This is your descendant selector. This is your immediate child selector. You have your ID selector, class selector, simple selector, all selector, wildcard selector. So likewise, we have a bunch of them. We have your anchor, hover, anchor link, anchor visited, like bunch of them that you can use. So whenever you have a requirement on an ad hoc requirement on applying a style using pseudo classes, so this is a very good document to refer to. Here is another good example where I wanted to target the divs with paragraphs as the only child. You can use only child pseudo class to do it. Okay, so this will filter out all the divs which contains any other child. Okay, if it has a paragraph and a span, for example, it will filter that out. It should target all the divs which contains only paragraph as the only child. We can use only child selector, pseudo class for it. Okay, likewise you can select multiple use these selectors to apply your to target your different HTML elements that you wanted to apply your styles to. Alrighty, so that's your CSS selectors. So the important ones are your ID selector, class selector, these two are, and your attribute selector. I would say everything is important, but at least at a very high level, if you know what pseudo classes are, that's good enough. You don't have to by heart or do anything. Okay. So these are the CSS property values. So we have seen these are your right hand side of your CSS property. So the left hand side is the name of the property, the right hand side is your value, right, after your colon. So these are some of the things that you can use as a values. So here you can use something like thin, thick, larger. For example, if you wanted to set your font, for example, you can say font is thin, thick, larger, smaller, extra small. You can do all of those things that you can apply for your fonts. You can also use physical measurements. Your physical measurements in terms of your inches, points, picas, millimeter and centimeter. These are your physical measurements that you can use. Okay, you can also do screen measurements in terms of your pixels. So your pixels is one very common thing that you will see a lot on your websites. You don't see your picas, millimeters or centimeters. Inches also you don't see them. Points maybe. But your screen measurements, pixels is something that you will see very often. You can also do relative measurements. Relative measurements are your percentages and m's. M. Okay, that's your relative measurements. So you'll see relative measurements pretty often. So there is a small advantage that you get with your relative measurements is a person who is using your website can apply their own styles if you use relative measurements. Okay, that's one of the advantage, but they cannot do that if you do pixels. Okay, M's are a very good one of the best practices that we use to set your font sizes on your website. Okay, we have talked a little bit about your colors. So either we can use your hex colors or your RGB colors, or your direct specifying the text color itself like red, green, blue and stuff, or use your HSL color values. Hue, saturation and lightness. Hue defines your color, and your V2 and V3, the value 2 and value 3 defines the percentages. So based upon those percentage values, your colors actually changes. Okay, and your fonts basically have your font style. Your font style defines like what type of font that you want. You might have seen that in a lot of your text editors, right? You pick Times New Roman, Arial, Courier New, Calibri. There are like bunch of fonts that you want. That are available. You choose whatever the appropriate font for your website. Your serif font is a default font on your Windows, and Helvetica is one other common font. It's a default font on your Mac operating system. So likewise, you choose whatever the fonts you want. But when you specify two fonts with a comma separated, what will happen is your browser will try to get the first font. If it's not available, it falls back on your second one. So that's your fonts. And we also have functional notation for your values, where you specify your RGB, how much amount of red, how much amount of green and how much amount of blue that you want to make up the color that you want. Or you can also use your function. These are functional notations where if you see I passed a URL here. So this is where I can say background URL. I can define this URL. So it basically takes this image and apply that as a background for my page. So these are your functional notation that we can have for your values. Either you define your keywords, physical measurements, screen measurements, relative measurements, color codes, fonts, or functional notations. Okay, these are some of the types of the values that you can have inside your CSS. Okay, so when you're talking about cascading, so CSS, there are two terms that you need to be very familiar with. So the style sheets are called cascading style sheets. Cascading means when you have more than one. So something happens one after the other, right? So that gives you a cascading effect. So that's what is your cascading style sheets as well. So when you are defining a style sheet for your website, so there are three different style sheets that you need to be aware of. Okay, one is your browser style sheet. Your browser style sheet or user agent style sheet. So your browser automatically applies some styles to your website. Okay, instead of you specifying some, there are browser defaults. Okay, each browser has their own defaults, like Firefox has its own browser defaults, Chrome has its own browser defaults, IE has its own browser defaults and stuff. When you open your application, your browser tend to apply its own defaults. So this type of style sheets is called user agent style sheets. Okay, and the second style sheets is basically your author style sheets. Your author style sheets is the website developer who is developing the website will define some styles for the website. That's your author style sheets. Okay, the third one is your user style sheets. Your user style sheets is where the end user who is in your application, for example, you open, let's say, crickinfo.com, and you don't like the font that they are using. What you can do is you can create your own style sheet and you can apply that style sheet onto that website. Okay, you can set that style sheet on your at your computer level, so that way all the websites you see on that computer will have that bigger font. Okay, as a user you can control that as well. That's your user style sheets. Okay, those are the three style sheets that we need to be aware of. One from the author, one from the browser, one from the end user. Okay, so out of these I have also defined the precedence here. Your user agent is a least precedence, author is a most, and one from the end user is a more precedence. Okay, least, more, and most. Okay, so because of the browser or the user agent style sheets, what happens is your websites might look a little different across multiple browsers. So what we do is, if I wanted to disable all of the browser style sheets, so there is something called CSS reset. Okay, this is available online. You can just download it and you can include this CSS reset style sheet. So you're starting on a clean slate. Okay, so your browser is not applying any style sheets. So all the style sheet that you define will get applied to the browser. So your browser will not apply anything. That's your CSS reset. It disables all the user agent style sheets and start with a clean slate. Okay, let's talk a little bit about CSS specificity rating. So when we have multiple styles defined, the styles basically gets applied. Your browser computes something called a CSS specificity number. So the higher the number, the higher the rule that have the higher number wins that rule. Okay, for example, let's take a look at a small example here. Okay, let's say I have so the way you can remember this CSS specificity rating by remembering this just like ABC. A basically stands for the count of ID selectors. B basically stands for count of class and attribute selectors. C basically stands for count of number of type selectors. Okay, your ID selectors, where you have your hash, that's your ID selector. Your class and attribute selector, dot, is your class selector. Attribute that I have shown your square brackets, where we have seen image alt equal to spacer, that's your attribute selector. And this is your type selector. Your type selector is nothing but your simple selectors. Okay, so let's say, for example, I have used a star to define my style. Okay, if you try to count, okay, the count of ID selectors, A is 0 because it's not an ID, correct? And count of class and attribute selector, B is also 0, and then it's not a type as well. C is also 0. The specificity number is 0. Okay, let's say if I have taken a UL, your unordered list. Okay, the count of ID selectors is 0 because it's not an ID. Count of class and attribute selector is 0 again. Count of number of type selectors, we have 1, right? Because UL is a type, simple selector. You have your 1 here. So 001 becomes 1. That's the specificity number. And then you have your UL and LI. So here I have 0 because there are no ID selectors, no class and attribute selectors. C equal to 2 because I have 2 type selectors. The specificity rating is 2. Okay, now let's take a look at this one right here. Li, I have dot red, correct? Li dot red. So I have one type selector, one class selector. I have A0, I have B1, C1, my specificity rating is 11. It's 0, 1, 1, it's 11. Okay, let's say if I have hash content, count of ID selectors is 1. Hash content it is not talking about class or attribute, so it would be 0. Count of number of type selectors is 0 again, so the value is 100. It's more number. Okay, so that's how your CSS specificity rating is calculated. Okay, so there is one other thing that you have to remember. Your inline styles always wins. The styles that you specify using your style attribute of your HTML, it always wins. Okay, let's take a look at an example of your this cascading and the other stuff. Yeah, let's take a look at the example of a cascading first. So there is another important thing that you have to know. So we can import one style sheet inside another style sheet. We can use your @import to do it. You can say @import URL. You can specify styles1.css. If you see inside my styles.css, I am including styles1.css. You can use your @import tag to do it. You can import one style sheet inside another style sheet. I don't think this is the right one. Let's open specificity. So this is the one that I wanted to show you. Okay, so this is a very good example. So let's take a look at your index page. Okay, your index page basically contains a head tag with a title and link, and there is a body and a div tag. Okay, very simple. It's a very small HTML fragment. Your div contains some text. Okay, so your index file is referring to styles.css. Let's open your styles.css file. Here if you see, I have a body, right? What is this selector? Immediate child selector, direct child selector, right? So I have a body tag. If I have a direct child of div, I want to apply background color red, and I want the color of the font to be white. Okay, I have a simple selector with a div, background color is black, and I want the font size to be 20 pixel. And I have a star selector, which I wanted to apply that to all the elements where I want the background color to be green. If you see for the same div, if you see there are like multiple colors that needs to be applied, red, black and green. So the way your browser computes your styles, as I said, using your CSS precedence, you can basically move this aside and you can compute your CSS precedence here. Okay, can one of you try to compute it? Go ahead, one of you try it. I already have this one right here. Star means 0, A0, B0, C0, it's 0. So what about this one? What is the value of div? What type of selector is this? It's a simple selector. It's a type selector basically. Okay, so what is the value for it? Okay, do you see any IDs there for that? No, it's 0. Count of class and attribute selector, it's 0. Type selector, it's 1. It's 0, 0 and 1. What about this one right here? Body div. So body is one type selector, div is another type selector, right? Now let's take a look at your website to see your colors. Okay, if you see, you have your red color that you have here inside your styles.css. If you see, background color is red. Okay, it won the race because these two are like, in a losing cause, because this has more specificity. So this is what is being applied. The background color is red, the font color is white. You understood how I computed the CSS specificity here? Star means it's 0, div is 1, and you have 2 here. Okay, so that's how your specificity is computed. Let's take a look at the next one. Okay, here is another example. You have your page.htm, which contains h1 h2. You have a div tag. Paragraph ID is content. Inside the div I have another paragraph class equal to quotation. Okay, let's visit the stylesheet.css file to see the style sheets that we have here. What is defined here? Here I have a div paragraph. So what is the selector? It's a descendant selector, right? You don't see a greater than symbol. That means it's a descendant selector. You have your background color applied is red. Paragraph, you have your background color is blue. Content, you have your background color is gray. Okay, so let's take a look at your okay, let's compute your specificity for these particular styles. Let me open that, and here. Okay, what about this guy here? We have two types, right? So count of ID is 0. This is 0. This is 2. So it's 0, 0, 2. That means it's 2. You have your paragraph, which is 1, right? It's 0, 0 and 1. You have your hash content, which is your ID selector. It's 1, 0 and 0. So your hash content basically have more precedence compared to your other styles in this document. Okay, paragraph ID equal to content. You'll see your A paragraph appear in your gray color, because that's what won the race of your CSS specificity. Let's go back to your, you see, you have your paragraph was given gray. Let's also look at that red one. Here is your paragraph, class equal to quotation. Here you have your div and your paragraph, right? So let's take a look at your index.html stylesheets.css. Okay, div and a paragraph. You have your background color is coming as red. Even the paragraph has a color specified. So this one has more specificity. So that's why your background color red has more specificity rating. So it won over your paragraph. Okay, understood how your specificity is applied in your CSS? You basically have to just remember that formula and then compute your to see whichever wins. Okay, and another important thing about your CSS is your inheritance. So some of the styles basically get inherited from your parent. Okay, for example, your font size, font family, so these are all inherited. Okay, if you apply that to the parent, the child also gets it. So whereas your certain properties are non-inherited, for example, a border is one good property which is non-inherited. Okay. So let's take a look at your an example for inheritance. So here is my page.html, which basically contains your stylesheet.css file, and I have two h1, h2, h1 and h2, and I have a div, I have a paragraph, and I have another div. So inside the paragraph I have a strong tag as well, and inside a div I have a paragraph as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the styles that are defined for this HTML file. So for my div I have font size is equal to 30 pixel, and as I said, font size is a property that gets inherited by a child. So let's see if there are any children for your div. So I have a div, inside that I have a paragraph. So this paragraph here will inherit the styles that are defined for your div. Okay, since font is one property which can be inherited, so it will inherit that particular property. Okay, now let's take a look at your paragraph. Paragraph has border 1 pixel solid black. So here, if you see here, inside this paragraph I have a strong tag. I said the paragraph should have a border. Okay, 1 pixel solid black. And your strong is a child of your paragraph. But this won't inherit the border property, because your border property is a property that your child cannot inherit from parent. Okay, so you can just click on this and you can see the values. Alrighty, let's take a look at that one more time. Okay, so here if you see there is one other style defined. I think I should have commented that out. So here I have a strong tag which contains the border as well. If you just remove the strong tag, if you see that border is applied to only that paragraph, yes, the strong tag is not inheriting it, right? And if you want the border to be there for your strong tag, you apply that border. Okay, if you see your paragraph inside the div inherited the div property here, font size 30 pixel. Your font family, font size, these are the inherited properties from your parent. So there are certain properties which are inherited, there are certain properties which are not inherited. Okay, these are a couple of examples that you can take a look. Alright, I'm going to stop there and we'll talk about CSS more in our next session.